Tonight, you're about to experience something quietly unsettling. Because what if everything you've ever known, every city, every ocean, every mountain, even your entire life, exists on something so small that, at the right scale, it simply disappears? Not metaphorically, not philosophically, literally. There is a point in the scale of the universe where Earth becomes too small to see, too small to measure, too small to matter in any physical sense at all. And most people never realize just how quickly we reach that point. From where you are right now, Earth feels enormous, endless even. You could spend your entire life traveling and never see all of it. Feels like everything. But that feeling is an illusion of perspective. And tonight, we're going to gently peel that illusion away. We'll move outward step by step, from Earth to the moon to the sun, beyond the planets, past the edge of the solar system, into the quiet depths between stars, and further still into structures so vast that language itself begins to fail. And somewhere along that journey, Earth will vanish. If you've ever watched our Valoran video about what happens when Earth suddenly disappears, you already know how fragile our place can be. But tonight isn't about disappearance through catastrophe. It's about disappearance through scale. Welcome to Valoran's Sleepy Space Mysteries, where we explore the quiet, infinite questions of the cosmos. If you enjoy drifting through these cosmic perspectives, consider subscribing, liking the video, turning on the bell, or even joining as a member to support the journey. And before we begin, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Let's begin the slow journey outward. And at first, nothing feels unusual. You are still standing on Earth. The ground beneath you feels solid, vast, almost infinite. Oceans stretch beyond the horizon. Continents span thousands of miles. From this perspective, Earth feels like everything that exists. And for most of human history, it truly was everything we knew. But now we take the first step back. Not far, just far enough to see Earth as a whole. And suddenly something changes. That enormous world beneath your feet compresses into a sphere. A single object, floating in darkness. Beautiful, yes, but no longer endless. No longer everything. Still, it remains large. Comfortably large. So we move a little farther. Now we travel to the moon's distance, about 384,000 kilometers away. Sounds like a lot, and it is in human terms. It took astronauts days to cross that gap. But what matters is not just the distance. It's what fills that distance, or rather, what doesn't. Because as you look back at Earth from here, something subtle but important reveals itself. The space between Earth and the moon is not crowded. It is not busy. It is not filled with swirling debris or glowing energy. It is almost entirely empty. In fact, you could line up roughly 30 Earths in a row between Earth and the moon, and they would just fit. That entire gap is mostly nothing. This is the first quiet clue. The scale of the universe is not just about how big things are. It's about how far apart they are and how much emptiness exists between them. Now pause here for a moment. Look at Earth from this distance. It's no longer something you can walk across. It's no longer a place with countries or cities. It's just a small, glowing sphere suspended in darkness. Everything you've ever known is contained inside that tiny circle. Every voice, every memory, every story, compressed into something you could hide behind your thumb if you stretched out your hand. And yet, we've barely begun, because now we continue outward. We move beyond the moon, beyond the comfortable boundary of Earth's immediate neighborhood, and toward something far more powerful: the sun. At first, it appears as a bright light growing slowly larger. But as we approach, scale begins to shift in a way that feels almost unfair. The sun is not just bigger than Earth. It is overwhelmingly larger. If Earth were the size of a small marble, the sun would be a massive glowing sphere over 100 times wider. Not 10 times, not even 50, over 100 times wider in diameter. But diameter alone doesn't tell the full story. Because when something becomes larger in all directions, its volume grows dramatically. And inside the sun, you could fit more than 1,000,000 Earths. Imagine that. Not 1,000, not 100,000. Over 1,000,000 Earth-sized worlds could disappear inside it. At this point, something strange happens to your sense of scale. Earth is no longer just small. It begins to feel fragile, almost insignificant. All the mountains you've ever seen, all the oceans, all of human history, everything fits into something that would barely register against the sun's vast presence. And yet, even here, something even more surprising is waiting. Because just like the space between Earth and the moon, the distance between Earth and the sun is mostly empty. About 150 million kilometers separate them. A number so large it becomes difficult to feel. Light itself, the fastest thing in the universe, takes over 8 minutes just to cross that distance. So imagine this. You are standing near the sun now, looking back toward where Earth should be. And what do you see? Not a detailed world, not continents or clouds, just a tiny, almost invisible speck, a single pixel of light. And if you didn't know exactly where to look, you might miss it entirely. This is the second clue. Not only is Earth small, it is also easily lost. And we are still inside what we call our local neighborhood. We haven't even left the solar system yet. So let that settle gently in your mind. Earth, which once felt infinite beneath your feet, is now a barely visible, floating in a vast ocean of emptiness, overshadowed by a star that itself is only one among many. And as we continue this journey, something even more unsettling begins to unfold, because soon even the sun will start to shrink. And when that happens, Earth won't just be small, it will be gone. Now we continue drifting farther away, leaving behind the familiar warmth of the sun, moving toward the outer reaches of the solar system, and at first, it feels like we are entering a crowded place filled with planets and motion. But the deeper truth is far quieter than that, because even here, where entire worlds orbit a star, space remains overwhelmingly empty, and as we pass the orbit of Mars, a cold and distant world compared to Earth, we approach a region that many imagine incorrectly, the asteroid belt, often pictured as a chaotic field of tumbling rocks packed tightly together. But in reality, it is another lesson in emptiness, because the asteroids are separated by vast distances, so far apart that a spacecraft could pass through without ever seeing one nearby. And this pattern continues again and again, reinforcing the same quiet idea that the scale of the universe is defined not by objects, but by the space between them. And then, something enormous begins to emerge ahead of us, slowly growing in presence until it dominates everything in view. Jupiter, the giant of our solar system, a world so large that it changes the way you think about planets entirely. Because Earth, which once felt substantial, now becomes something that could be swallowed effortlessly. Over 1,000 Earths could fit inside Jupiter. And yet, even that comparison doesn't fully capture the feeling, because Jupiter is not just bigger, it is overwhelmingly dominant, holding more mass than all the other planets combined, shaping the structure of the solar system itself through its gravity, acting almost like a silent guardian, pulling in comets and debris that might otherwise travel inward towards smaller worlds like Earth. But even here, standing near this giant, something strange begins to happen again, because despite Jupiter's immense size, the distances between planets remain enormous. The gap between Jupiter and Saturn stretches across hundreds of millions of kilometers, a vast, silent expanse where nothing interrupts the darkness. And when we finally reach Saturn, with its delicate rings stretching outward like a fragile halo, we see beauty, but we also see scale in a new way, because those rings, which appear solid from a distance, are actually made of countless tiny particles, each separated by space, each orbiting in a system that is far more empty than it first appears. We continue outward, passing Uranus and Neptune, the distant ice giants, where sunlight itself grows weak, taking hours to arrive, where time slows in a different way, because a single orbit around the sun can take decades, even centuries. And here, at the edge of the known planets, something subtle begins to shift in your perception, because the sun, once overwhelming, now begins to shrink behind you, no longer dominating the sky, but becoming just another bright point among darkness. And this is the third clue that even the largest objects we know begin to lose their dominance as distance increases. Beyond Neptune, we enter the Kuiper Belt, a distant region filled with icy remnants from the early solar system, where Pluto resides, no longer considered a major planet, but still a world in its own right, small, cold, and distant. And yet even here, the same truth continues. The objects are scattered, separated by vast distances, each one alone in the darkness. And as we move beyond this region, something even more difficult to imagine begins to unfold. We approach the Oort cloud, not a flat disk like the planets, but a vast spherical shell surrounding the entire solar system, extending so far that its outer edge reaches nearly halfway to the nearest star. And this is where the scale becomes almost impossible to feel, because the distances are no longer measured in millions or even billions of kilometers, but in trillions, in units so large that they lose meaning in everyday thought. And within this enormous boundary, the sun's gravitational influence begins to fade. Objects drift loosely, barely held, existing in a slow, distant dance at the edge of our star's reach. Now pause again and look back. From here, the entire solar system collapses into something almost invisible. The orbits of planets, once vast and separate, compress into a tiny region around a single point of light. And that point is the sun. And Earth, which once filled your entire horizon, is now not just small, but completely lost, indistinguishable, gone within the glare of that distant star. This is the moment where something profound settles in, because we have not yet reached other stars, we have not yet entered the galaxy, and already everything you have ever known has disappeared from view, not destroyed, not changed, simply reduced beyond visibility by scale alone. And as we prepare to leave this distant boundary behind, drifting into the space between stars, a new question begins to form quietly in the background. If an entire solar system can shrink to a single point, then what happens when we step into a galaxy filled with hundreds of billions of stars? Because that is where we are going next. And that is where Earth doesn't just become invisible. It becomes something far more difficult to describe. Now we cross a boundary that feels almost invisible. And yet, everything changes. We leave behind the outermost edge of the solar system, drifting beyond the distant shell of the Oort cloud, and for a moment, there is nothing around us at all, no planets, no sunlight warming nearby worlds, just a faint star behind us that used to be our sun, now reduced to a bright point in an endless darkness. And this is where the silence of space becomes truly profound, because we are no longer inside a system. We are between systems in the vast interstellar void. At first, it feels like we should quickly arrive somewhere new, another star, another system, something familiar to anchor our sense of scale. But that expectation fades slowly as we continue forward, because the distances between stars are not like the distances between planets. They are vastly, overwhelmingly larger, so large that even light, the fastest thing that exists, takes years to cross them. And this is where we introduce a new way of thinking, not in kilometers or miles, but in time itself, because distance here is measured in how long light travels. The nearest star to our sun is Proxima Centauri, and it is about 4.2 light-years away, which means that the light you would see from it tonight began its journey more than 4 years ago. And if you tried to travel there using the fastest spacecraft humanity has ever built, it would take tens of thousands of years to arrive. And suddenly the scale shifts again, not just in size but in time, because space is no longer something you cross in days or months. It becomes something that spans lifetimes, civilizations, entire eras of history. Now imagine looking back toward our solar system from this distance, and what do you see? Not Earth, not Jupiter, not even the detailed structure of planets orbiting a star. You see a single point of light, the sun, shining among countless others, and within that light, Earth is completely gone, not hidden, not faint, but fundamentally unresolvable, too small and too close to its star to ever be seen. And this is the moment where the main question begins to answer itself, because Earth has not just become small, it has become undetectable. But we continue outward, because even this distance, which already feels immense, is still part of a relatively close neighborhood. A small cluster of stars within a much larger structure. And as we drift farther, more stars begin to appear around us, scattered in every direction, forming a faint, glowing backdrop, and gradually, a pattern begins to emerge, a soft band of light stretching across the darkness, and that band is something you have seen before from Earth as a faint glow in the night sky, the Milky Way. Now we begin to understand where we are, inside a galaxy, a vast system containing hundreds of billions of stars, each one separated by distances just as immense as the one we have crossed. And yet together, they form a structure so large that even light takes 100,000 years to travel from one side to the other. And this is where scale becomes almost impossible to hold in your mind, because we are no longer dealing with single systems, but with an entire cosmic city of stars. As we move deeper into this galactic perspective, something remarkable happens to our sense of importance, because the sun, which once dominated everything, is now just one ordinary star among billions, not special in size, not unique in brightness, simply one point among countless others, and Earth, which once felt like everything, is now less than a detail within that point, smaller than anything that can be meaningfully described at this scale. And yet, even within this vast galaxy, there is structure, spiral arms filled with stars, regions where new suns are born, areas of relative calm where systems like ours drift quietly, and somewhere within one of these gentle regions, far from the chaotic center, our solar system moves slowly through the galaxy, completing a single orbit in hundreds of millions of years, a timescale so long that entire chapters of life on Earth pass in what is only a small fraction of that journey. Now pause again and reflect on how far we have come, because not long ago, Earth filled your entire perception, it was everything, and now it has vanished completely, not just from sight, but from meaningful existence within this scale, and we are still not at the largest structures, not even close. Because ahead lies something even more astonishing, something that will make even this galaxy feel small, collections of galaxies, vast clusters, and beyond them, structures so immense that they stretch across hundreds of millions of light years, forming patterns that resemble a web, a cosmic network of matter and emptiness. And as we continue outward into that structure, something even more unsettling begins to take shape, because if a galaxy can make Earth disappear, then what happens when galaxies themselves begin to shrink? That is where the scale of the universe becomes truly unimaginable. Now we move beyond the galaxy, and this is where the shift becomes almost impossible to hold on to, because up until now, even though the distances have been vast, there was still a sense of structure, stars arranged in a disk, a galaxy with shape and motion, something your mind could loosely imagine. But as we continue outward, that structure begins to dissolve into something far larger and far more abstract. The Milky Way, which once felt enormous, now starts to shrink behind us, its spiral arms blending into a soft glow, its hundreds of billions of stars compressing into a single luminous patch, and then, even that fades into just one galaxy among many, because surrounding it are others, scattered across space, each one containing billions or even trillions of stars, and together, they form what we call the local group, a small gathering of galaxies bound together by gravity. At first, the local group might sound large, but in truth, it is just a quiet neighborhood, containing only a few dozen galaxies, the Milky Way, Andromeda, and many smaller companions, all drifting slowly through space. And even here, the distances are staggering. The gap between the Milky Way and Andromeda alone spans about 2.5 million light-years, meaning the light we see from Andromeda tonight began its journey before humans even existed in their current form. Now pause and look back again. From this distance, the Milky Way is no longer a structure you are inside. It is something you observe from the outside, a faint swirl of light, and within that swirl, the sun is just one star among hundreds of billions, and Earth is not just invisible, it is beyond any possibility of detection, smaller than anything that could ever be resolved, even in theory. And this is where the concept of scale begins to slip away from direct understanding, because we are no longer comparing sizes, we are confronting limits. But we continue outward. Beyond the local group lies something far larger, clusters of galaxies. Massive gatherings where hundreds or even thousands of galaxies are bound together, drifting in slow, gravitational dances that take billions of years to unfold. And these clusters themselves are not isolated. they are connected, forming even larger structures called superclusters, immense regions of space where galaxy clusters gather along vast filaments. And this is where something extraordinary appears. When astronomers map the universe at this scale, they don't see randomness. They see a pattern, a cosmic web, enormous strands of galaxies stretching across space, intersecting at dense nodes with vast empty voids between them, regions so empty that if you were there, you might see almost nothing at all for hundreds of millions of light years in every direction. And this structure, this web, spans distances so vast that even light takes hundreds of millions of years to travel along a single filament. Now imagine shrinking everything you've known into this structure. The Milky Way becomes a tiny point along one of these filaments. The local group becomes indistinguishable. The sun is no longer a star of note. And Earth has not just disappeared, it has lost any meaningful way of being described within this scale, because it is not simply small, it is beyond comparison. This is the fourth clue. There comes a level of the scale of the universe where objects no longer shrink in a way we can track. They simply fall below the threshold of meaning. And yet we continue, because even this cosmic web, vast as it is still not the full picture. It is only the structure within what we call the observable universe, the region of space from which light has had time to reach us since the beginning of everything. And this observable universe spans about 93 billion light-years across, a number so large that even the word billion begins to lose its weight. Within this enormous volume, there are trillions of galaxies, each containing billions or trillions of stars, and around many of those stars, planets, worlds, perhaps even places not entirely unlike Earth. And yet, despite this unimaginable abundance, something remains constant. Earth is nowhere to be found, not because it does not exist, but because at this scale its existence is too small to register, too small to influence the structure, too small to appear in any meaningful way. Now pause one final time within this part of the journey. Let the silence settle, because we have moved from standing on Earth to losing it entirely, not through destruction, not through distance alone, but through understanding, through the realization that scale itself has a kind of quiet power, one that does not erase things but gently reduces them until they fade from perception. And yet, something deeper is beginning to form, because if Earth can disappear so completely in size, why does it still feel so important? That question is what we will begin to explore next, as we move into an even deeper layer of this cosmic perspective. And now, something subtle begins to shift, not in distance, not in size, but in meaning, because up to this point we have been quietly watching Earth fade away, watching it shrink from something that felt infinite into something that cannot even be seen. And yet, despite everything we've just experienced, despite the overwhelming scale, despite the endless emptiness, there is still a quiet contradiction that remains unresolved. Because you are still here. Somehow, on something that has completely vanished in the scale of the universe, awareness exists. Thought exists. Curiosity exists. And that creates a kind of tension, a gentle mystery that sits beneath everything we've explored so far. So let's stay here for a moment, not moving farther outward, but holding this position at the edge of the observable structures we've just crossed. And instead of asking how small Earth is, we begin to ask something slightly different. What does small actually mean? Because in the vast cosmic web, Size determines visibility, influence, gravitational power, the ability to shape galaxies, to bend light, to pull matter across millions of light years. By those measures, Earth is nothing. It does not shape the cosmos. It does not influence the motion of galaxies. It does not leave any detectable mark on the large-scale structure of the universe. And yet, everything we have ever known has happened there. Every idea, every story, every discovery about this vast universe began on that invisible point. The very concept of the scale of the universe exists only because something on Earth was able to observe, to measure, to imagine beyond itself. So now the perspective begins to gently turn inward, even as we remain at the largest scales. Because something unusual emerges here. At the scale of galaxies and superclusters, matter dominates. Gravity shapes everything. Vast structures form and evolve over billions of years. But none of that scale contains awareness, at least not in any way we can detect. Stars burn, galaxies rotate, black holes consume, but they do not wonder. Earth does. And this introduces a different kind of scale, one that is not measured in size or distance, but in experience. Because while Earth disappears physically, it becomes uniquely significant in another way, as a place where the universe has, in a sense, become aware of itself. Every observation we've made in this journey, every step outward from Earth to the edge of the observable universe, has been traced back to that one small world. And now something begins to close. Remember the question that quietly followed us from the beginning, the moment we first stepped away from Earth and began watching it shrink? At what point does Earth disappear? We've answered that now. It disappears surprisingly early, long before we leave our own solar system, long before we reach other stars, long before galaxies even enter the picture. In terms of physical scale, Earth vanishes almost immediately. But now we see the second half of the answer. Even after it disappears physically, it remains central in another way. Because without Earth, there is no perspective. Without perspective, there is no scale. And without scale, the universe is just silent expansion, unfolding without being noticed. So as we rest here, at the edge of everything we can observe, something begins to feel different about the journey we've taken. It was never just about shrinking Earth. It was about understanding contrast. Because the scale of the universe does not only show us how small we are, it also quietly reveals how rare it is for something small to understand something so large. And that realization does not feel overwhelming in the same way anymore. Feels calm. Because nothing we've seen has changed what Earth is. It has only changed how we see it. That small, invisible point still holds oceans, skies, life, and awareness. It still holds the only place, as far as we know, where the universe reflects on itself. And as we begin to slowly drift back from this vast perspective, something soft settles into place. The universe is unimaginably large. Earth is unimaginably small. And yet, somehow, they are connected through understanding. So let the scale fade gently now. Let the vast distances soften. Let the structures dissolve back into quiet darkness. And imagine yourself once again, standing on that small world, looking up at the night sky, knowing that everything you've just experienced, every galaxy, every cluster, every filament of the cosmic web, exists out there, far beyond sight. But also knowing this, that from that small, unseen place, you were able to reach all of it. And now we begin again. But this time something is different. Because before we were moving outward, watching Earth shrink, watching it disappear into distance and scale. But now we already know that Earth is gone. Not destroyed, just beyond visibility, beyond measurement, beyond physical significance. So instead of asking how small Earth becomes, we begin asking something deeper. What happens to reality itself when scale reaches its limits? Let's return for a moment to where we left off, floating somewhere within the Milky Way, surrounded by a quiet ocean of stars, each one separated by distances so vast that even light takes years to cross them. From here, the galaxy feels immense, almost endless, a soft, glowing structure stretching across space like a river of light. But even this has boundaries. And as we begin to move again, slowly drifting outward from our position within the galaxy, something subtle begins to change. The density of stars decreases. The glowing band of the Milky Way softens. The structure that once surrounded us begins to flatten, to compress, until eventually, we are no longer inside it. We are outside. Now, for the first time, you can see the Milky Way as a whole. A vast spiral galaxy, its arms curving gracefully around a dense central core, hundreds of billions of stars forming a shape that is both structured and fragile at the same time. And yet, from here, it is small, not tiny, but small enough to hold in your view. This is where perspective shifts again, because just as Earth once filled your entire awareness, and then became a dot, now the entire galaxy begins to follow the same path. It compresses into something you can observe at once, something finite, something contained, and around it, there are others. First, just a few, faint smudges of light scattered through darkness. But as your eyes adjust, more appear. Dozens, then hundreds, each one a galaxy of its own, each one containing billions or trillions of stars, each one with its own systems, its own histories, its own invisible worlds. And suddenly, the Milky Way is no longer the main structure. It is just one among many. This is where the scale of the universe reveals something even more unsettling than size repetition. Because galaxies are everywhere. Not identical, but similar. Spiral galaxies, elliptical galaxies, irregular galaxies, all scattered across space like distant islands in a vast cosmic ocean. And this repetition quietly removes something we often assume: uniqueness. The Milky Way feels special when you are inside it. But from here, it becomes ordinary. And if the galaxy is ordinary, then what does that make the solar system? What does that make Earth? Now we drift farther. The galaxies begin to group together, pulled by gravity into clusters. Some clusters contain hundreds of galaxies, others thousands, all bound together in slow, massive structures that take billions of years to evolve. And within these clusters, galaxies interact, collide, merge, stretching and reshaping over time in ways that are both violent and graceful. But even these clusters are not isolated. They connect. This is where the structure begins to reveal itself more clearly. Galaxies are not randomly scattered. They follow patterns, forming long filaments that stretch across space, connecting clusters like threads in a vast cosmic web. Between these filaments are enormous voids, regions so empty that they contain almost nothing at all. And here, something happens to your sense of reality, because scale is no longer just about size. It becomes about distribution, about patterns, about the architecture of existence itself. You are no longer looking at objects. You are looking at structure. And within that structure, everything you've ever known has been reduced to something smaller than a thought. Earth is gone. The solar system is gone. Even the sun, once so overwhelming, has no role here. All that remains are patterns of matter and emptiness, stretching across distances so vast that even the idea of distance begins to lose meaning. And yet, we keep going, because even this cosmic web, as immense as it feels, is still only part of something larger. Something that has a boundary, not in space exactly, but in observation, the observable universe. A region defined not by edges you can touch, but by the limits of light itself, by how far information has had time to travel since the beginning of everything. And as we approach that boundary, something even more profound begins to emerge. Because here, at the edge of what can be seen, we begin to encounter a new kind of mystery. Not just how big the universe is, but whether what we can see is all there is. As we approach the edge of the observable universe, something begins to feel different again. But this time, it's not just about size or distance, it's about limits, because for the first time in this journey, we are not simply moving outward into something larger, we are approaching the boundary of what can ever be seen. Not because there is nothing beyond it, but because light itself has not had enough time to reach us. This is where the idea of distance becomes deeply tied to time. Every direction you look is not just space. It is history. The farther you look, the further back in time you are seeing. Light from distant galaxies has been traveling for billions of years, carrying with it a snapshot of what those galaxies looked like long ago, and so the edge of the observable universe is not just far away, it is ancient. Now imagine this gently. You are floating here at a distance so vast that the galaxies around you appear as faint points, scattered across darkness, and every one of those points is a story from the past, some from a few million years ago, others from billions, and as you look farther, the light becomes older, dimmer, stretched by the expansion of space itself until eventually, you reach a point where there is no visible structure at all, just a faint, uniform glow. This glow is not made of stars. It is not made of galaxies. It is something far older. It is the afterglow of the beginning. A quiet radiation left over from a time when the universe was still young, hot, and dense, long before stars had formed, long before galaxies existed, when everything was closer, simpler, and yet far more extreme than anything we experience now. This is the cosmic background, a kind of ancient light that fills all of space, and reaching it feels like touching the earliest moment we can ever observe. Not the beginning itself, but the closest visible echo of it. And here, the sense of scale reaches something like a limit, because beyond this point, there is no more visual journey. No more stepping outward in a way that reveals new structures. Not because the universe ends, but because our ability to see ends. And this introduces a new kind of mystery. If the observable universe is limited by light, then what lies beyond it? We don't know. And that uncertainty is not due to lack of effort or lack of technology, but because of a fundamental boundary built into reality itself. Light has a finite speed, and the universe has a finite age, and together those two facts create a horizon, a sphere around us beyond which information has simply not had time to arrive. So imagine this quietly. Everything you have seen in this journey, every galaxy, every cluster, every filament of the cosmic web, exists within this sphere. A sphere about 93 billion light-years across. And outside of it, there may be more, possibly much more. Perhaps the universe continues in the same pattern, galaxies stretching endlessly in all directions. Or perhaps it changes, becoming something entirely different. Or perhaps it is infinite with no edge at all. We do not know, and yet we can feel the implication, because if what we can observe already contains trillions of galaxies, then what lies beyond this boundary could be far greater than anything we have imagined. Now pause here. Let the idea settle slowly, because for the first time we are not just dealing with something large. We are dealing with something unknowable. And in that unknowable space, Earth becomes something even smaller than before, not just physically insignificant, but completely disconnected from the larger whole, a tiny point within a limited region of something that may have no limits at all. But then, something interesting happens, because even though we cannot see beyond this boundary, we can think about it. We can imagine it. We can build theories about it. Some ideas suggest that the universe may be infinite, stretching forever in all directions, with no edge, no center, no boundary at all. Others suggest that what we call our universe might be just one part of something larger, a collection of many universes, sometimes called a multiverse, where different regions could have different properties, different laws, even different realities. These ideas are quiet, speculative, and not yet proven, but they emerge naturally when we follow the logic of scale to its edge. Because once you accept that the observable universe is only what we can see, it becomes natural to wonder what we cannot. And now something closes gently. Remember the feeling from the beginning, when Earth felt enormous, when it seemed like everything. That feeling has been slowly, steadily transformed, not into something frightening, but into something expansive, something that stretches beyond imagination, and yet remains strangely calm. Because the scale of the universe does not rush. It does not overwhelm all at once. It unfolds slowly, step by step, allowing you to adjust, to understand, to let each layer settle before revealing the next. And now, we have reached the edge of what can be known through observation, but not the edge of thought, because in the next step of this journey, we will gently explore what happens when we go beyond observation and into possibility, where the universe may not just be vast, but endlessly repeating, endlessly branching, endlessly expanding into realities we may never see. And in that space, the question of Earth size takes on an entirely new meaning. Now, we move beyond what can be seen, not by traveling farther, but by thinking differently, because we've reached a quiet boundary. The observable universe has shown us everything light has had time to reveal. Every galaxy, every cluster, every filament of the cosmic web, all contained within a vast sphere of visibility. And beyond that, there is silence. Not empty silence, but unseen silence. So the journey changes. It becomes less about distance and more about possibility. Imagine gently that the universe does not end at that boundary, that what we see is only a small region within something far larger, not just larger in size, but potentially without limit. If the universe continues beyond what we can observe, then there may be regions so distant that their light will never reach us, no matter how long we wait. Entire galaxies, entire structures, forever hidden. And if that is true, then what we call the universe is not the whole story. It is just our visible portion. This idea begins to soften the meaning of scale even further. Because before we were comparing Earth to galaxies, to clusters, to the observable universe. But now, even the observable universe becomes just one region among many possible regions, perhaps repeating, perhaps varying, perhaps extending endlessly in all directions. And here something quietly profound appears. If the universe is infinite, then somewhere, far beyond what we can see, there may be regions that resemble this one. Galaxies like the Milky Way, stars like the Sun, planets like Earth. Not exactly the same, but similar enough that the patterns repeat. And if the patterns repeat often enough, then the idea becomes almost unavoidable. There could be countless worlds like ours. Not just a few and not just thousands, but potentially infinite. Now pause with that thought, because it changes something subtle about the journey we've taken. Before, Earth felt small because it was compared to something larger. But now, Earth feels small in a different way, not just physically but statistically. It becomes one possibility among many, one instance in a vast pattern, one outcome in a universe that may produce similar outcomes again and again across unimaginable distances. And yet, something still remains unique, because even if there are other Earth-like worlds, even if there are other places where life exists, even if there are other beings looking out into their own night skies wondering about scale, this particular experience, this exact perspective exists only here. You are here, on this earth, in this moment, and that anchors everything. Now, we take one step further into possibility. Some theories suggest that what we call the universe may not even be the only universe. That there could be many universes, each with its own conditions, its own laws, its own structures. A vast collection sometimes described as a multiverse, where each universe exists like a bubble within a much larger framework. In some of these universes, the laws of physics might be slightly different. Stars might form differently. Matter might behave in unfamiliar ways. In others, the differences might be subtle, nearly identical to our own, with only small variations that lead to entirely different histories. These ideas are quiet and uncertain, but they emerge naturally when we follow scale to its furthest limits. Because once you accept that our observable universe is not the whole, it becomes natural to ask how many such regions might exist. And here, Earth changes again. It is no longer just a small planet in a large universe. It becomes a small planet in one universe, among potentially many universes. At this level, scale is no longer something we can measure in distance or size. It becomes something conceptual, something that stretches beyond physical comparison. Because how do you compare one universe to another? How do you measure something that may not share the same space, the same rules, or even the same idea of distance? And so, the journey slows, because we have reached a place where answers become softer, where certainty fades into possibility, where the edges of knowledge become gently blurred. But something important remains clear. From the very beginning, we asked how small Earth is, and along the way, we watched it shrink, disappear, dissolve into scale after scale, until it became something that could no longer be seen or measured. And yet, it never truly left the story, because every layer of understanding, every expansion of scale, every step outward into the vastness was carried with us from that small world. So now, as we rest in this space of possibility, where universes may extend beyond sight and reality itself may branch into countless forms, something quietly resolves. Earth may be small, but it is not irrelevant, because without it, none of this journey would exist. And as we prepare to move into the final part of this exploration, something gentle begins to guide us back, not physically, but in perspective, drawing us slowly inward again, not to undo what we've seen, but to understand it differently. Because in the end, the scale of the universe is not just about how small we are. It's about how something small can still hold something infinite. And now we begin to return, not by reversing the journey, but by softening it. Because after traveling so far outward, after reaching the limits of observation, after touching the edges of possibility itself, something inside the experience begins to settle. The vastness is still there. The scale has not changed, but the way it feels begins to shift. So instead of moving farther away, we gently drift inward again. Not quickly, not all at once, just enough to begin reconnecting with something familiar. The cosmic web fades behind us, those enormous filaments of galaxies stretching across unimaginable distances, slowly dissolving into a softer structure. The clusters shrink. The superclusters lose their overwhelming presence. And once again, galaxies begin to feel like individual things rather than patterns in a vast network. We pass back through the local group. The Andromeda Galaxy, once just one among trillions, becomes recognizable again. A neighboring island of stars slowly moving toward the Milky Way in a quiet, inevitable dance that will take billions of years to complete. And then, the Milky Way returns. At first, it appears as a distant spiral, a glowing disk suspended in darkness. But as we drift closer, its structure begins to open up. The spiral arms become more defined. Regions of light and shadow emerge. The density of stars increases, and slowly we re-enter it. Now we are once again inside the galaxy, surrounded by stars scattered across space. each one separated by distances so vast that silence still dominates everything. But something has changed. Before, this felt enormous. Now it feels gentle, because you have seen what lies beyond it. The galaxy is no longer the ultimate structure. It is one layer among many, one step in a much larger hierarchy of scale. And within this galaxy, somewhere in a quiet region far from the crowded center, there is a small, unremarkable star, the sun. We move closer, and just as before, it begins to grow slowly at first, then more clearly until it becomes the dominant object in view once again. A bright, steady presence, radiating warmth and light into the surrounding space. But now it feels different too, because you know what it is. Not the center of everything, not unique, not extraordinary in the grand scale of the universe. Just one star among hundreds of billions in this galaxy alone. And yet, it matters here, because around it, there are worlds. We drift inward, passing the distant orbits of Neptune and Uranus, moving through the outer regions of the solar system where sunlight is faint and time moves slowly. The Kuiper Belt appears again, scattered icy bodies drifting in darkness, remnants of the early formation of this system. And then we move closer still, past Saturn with its delicate rings, past Jupiter, still massive, still dominant within this local space, but no longer overwhelming in the way it once seemed. Because now, everything has context. The inner planets appear. Mars, quiet and cold. Venus, shrouded and intense. And then, Earth. At first, it is just a small sphere, blue and white, fragile against the darkness. So small that it almost feels surprising that this is the place where everything we've experienced has originated. But as we move closer, something changes again. Details return. Clouds swirl across its surface. Oceans reflect light. Continents take shape. The thin atmosphere becomes visible as a faint glow hugging the planet. And suddenly, it is not small anymore. Not in the way that matters here, because scale has shifted, not physically, but perceptually. You have seen what lies beyond. You have felt the vastness. You have watched Earth disappear completely within it. And now, returning to it, you see it not as something insignificant, but as something specific, defined, real, present. We move closer still. The curvature of the planet fills your view. The sense of distance fades. The details sharpen. And then you are here again, standing on the surface, feeling the ground beneath you, looking up at the sky. Nothing has changed, and yet everything has, because now when you look up, you are not just seeing stars. You are seeing distances, structures, layers of reality extending far beyond what the eye can perceive. You are seeing a universe that you have traveled through, step by step, from the smallest scale to the largest and back again. And within that understanding, something becomes calm, because the scale of the universe is no longer overwhelming. It is not something that makes you feel lost or insignificant. It is something that gives perspective, something that shows how vast everything is, and how unique it is to be able to experience it at all. So now, as the journey slows, As the vastness settles into quiet understanding, one final layer remains. Not about distance, not about size, but about meaning. Because in the final part of this journey, we will gently explore what it truly means to exist on something so small within something so vast, and why that contrast may be the most important part of all. And now, we arrive at something quieter than distance, softer than scale, something that has been present the entire time, but only becomes clear at the end of the journey. Because after everything we've seen, after watching Earth shrink, disappear, and then gently return, one question remains, resting quietly beneath it all. If Earth is so small, why does it feel so meaningful? This is where the scale of the universe reveals its final layer. Not a measurement, but a realization. Because throughout this journey we have been comparing size. Earth to the moon, Earth to the sun, the solar system to the galaxy to the cosmic web. And each step has shown us the same pattern, that Earth becomes smaller, less visible, less significant in physical terms. But physical scale is only one kind of scale. There is another that moves in the opposite direction. As the universe grows larger, experience becomes more concentrated. Because everything you have ever felt, every memory, every thought, every moment of awareness has happened on that one small world. And nowhere else, as far as we know, does the universe pause to notice itself in quite the same way. Stars burn without awareness. Galaxies rotate without memory. Even the vast cosmic web, stretching across hundreds of millions of light years, unfolds in silence, without observation. But on Earth, something different happens. Here, the universe reflects, and that reflection does not depend on size. It does not require vast mass or gravitational influence. It exists within something small, something fragile, something that disappears entirely when viewed from far enough away. And yet, it exists. Now let that contrast settle gently, because this is where the journey transforms. At the beginning, the shrinking of Earth might have felt unsettling. The idea that everything we know could vanish into nothingness at the right scale can feel disorienting, even uncomfortable. But now, after moving through every layer of the universe and returning again, that same idea feels different, feels peaceful, because small does not mean unimportant. Small means specific. Small means rare. Small means this moment, this perspective, this quiet awareness of something vast and beautiful and incomprehensible. And perhaps that is the deeper mystery that was waiting for us all along. Not how small Earth is, but how something so small can hold something so expansive. Because when you look at the night sky now, you are not just looking outward. You are participating in something that bridges scales. A connection between the smallest and the largest, between something that disappears in the physical sense and something that remains in the experiential sense. And that connection changes the way the universe feels. It is no longer just vast. It is intimate, because even though the distances are enormous, even though the structures stretch far beyond anything we can truly imagine, they are not separate from you. They are part of the same reality that allows you to observe them. The same laws, the same matter, the same unfolding story. You are not outside the scale of the universe. You are inside it. And more than that, you are one of the few places, perhaps the only place we know, where that scale is understood. So now, as everything begins to slow, as the journey settles into stillness, let the vastness remain, but let the tension fade. There is no need to measure it anymore. No need to compare. No need to reduce Earth to numbers or distances, because you have already seen it. You have already felt it. The universe is vast beyond comprehension. Earth is small beyond description. And yet, here you are, aware of both, and that may be the most extraordinary scale of all. So let your mind rest here for a moment. Drift gently between the stars, not as something lost, but as something connected. Let the galaxies fade into soft light. Let the distances stretch into calm silence. Let the idea of scale dissolve into something simple and quiet. A small world in a vast universe, holding the ability to understand it. And as the final part of this journey approaches, we will let everything slow even further, moving not toward explanation, but toward stillness, where the universe is no longer something to explore, but something to gently drift within. And now, we let everything slow down. No more rushing outward. No more expanding scale. No more comparisons that stretch the mind to its limits. Because you have already seen enough. You have traveled from the surface of Earth to the moon to the sun, across the solar system, beyond the stars, through the galaxy, into clusters, across the cosmic web, and finally to the edge of what can be observed. There is nowhere farther we need to go. So instead we drift, gently, calmly, without direction. And as we do, something begins to soften inside the experience. The universe is still vast, still incomprehensibly large, but it no longer feels overwhelming. Feels quiet, almost still, because when you stop measuring it, when you stop trying to understand it through numbers and distances, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes a kind of presence. Imagine yourself floating in space now, not moving toward anything, not leaving anything behind, simply existing within it. Around you, there are no clear edges, no boundaries, no markers of distance, just darkness and distant light. Each point of light is a star. Some of those stars have planets. Some of those planets may have oceans, skies, perhaps even life. But none of that needs to be explored right now, because this moment is not about discovery. It is about stillness. The scale of the universe, when followed to its end, does not lead to more complexity. It leads to simplicity, a quiet understanding that everything, no matter how large or small, exists within the same unfolding reality. And within that reality, there is no urgency. Galaxies take billions of years to evolve. Stars burn for millions or billions of years. Even the expansion of the universe itself happens slowly, gently stretching space over unimaginable spans of time. Nothing here is rushed, and you are part of that same pace. Now, let your awareness drift slightly, not outward, but inward. not toward Earth as a place, but toward the feeling of being there. The sensation of standing under a night sky, the quiet hum of the world around you, the distant sound of wind or waves or silence. Because even though Earth is small, it is where this awareness exists. And awareness does not need to be large. It only needs to be present. Now imagine the night sky above you, not as something distant, but as something you are gently connected to. The stars are not just points of light. They are part of the same universe that you are part of, made of the same fundamental elements, following the same quiet laws of physics. There is no separation, only distance. And distance, as you have seen, is something that can be understood, even if it cannot be crossed. So let that understanding settle. You do not need to travel the universe to be part of it. You already are. Every atom in your body was formed in the heart of a star. Every breath you take is part of a continuous exchange with the world around you. Every thought you have is a reflection of a universe complex enough to produce awareness. And all of that exists on a world that disappears completely when viewed from far enough away. There is something quietly beautiful about that, because it means that meaning does not come from size. It does not come from scale. It does not come from how much space something occupies. It comes from experience, from presence, from the simple fact that something exists and is able to notice that it exists. So now, let everything become softer. Let the galaxies fade into distant light. Let the vast structures dissolve into calm darkness. Let the idea of scale become something you no longer need to hold on to, because you have already carried it as far as it can go. And what remains is something much simpler, a quiet universe and a quiet awareness within it. No need to compare, no need to measure, just exist. And as you remain here, gently drifting in this quiet awareness, something even softer begins to emerge. Not a new idea, not a new layer of scale, but a different way of feeling the same universe you have already seen. Because earlier, the scale of the universe was something we followed outward, step by step, watching everything grow larger while Earth became smaller. It was a journey of expansion, of stretching the mind to hold distances that barely make sense. But now, the direction changes, not outward, but inward, not toward size, but toward stillness. Imagine again that you are lying somewhere peaceful, perhaps under a night sky, or simply resting with your eyes closed. You are not trying to picture galaxies or distances anymore. You are not measuring light years or imagining structures. You are simply aware. And in that awareness, the entire universe is already present. Because everything you experienced, every star, every galaxy, every layer of the cosmic web, exists not just out there, but also within your understanding. It has already been brought into your mind, gently, piece by piece, until the vastness became something you could hold without effort. And now, it begins to feel lighter, because the need to grasp it disappears. The universe does not need to be fully understood to be appreciated. It does not need to be measured to be meaningful. It simply exists quietly, continuously, whether we think about it or not. And so do you. on that small world, turning slowly in space, orbiting a quiet star, moving gently through a galaxy that itself drifts through something even larger. All of it happening without urgency, without pressure, without demand. There is a deep calm in that realization, because nothing in the universe is rushing. Stars do not hurry to burn. Galaxies do not rush to form. Even the expansion of space itself unfolds slowly, over billions of years, stretching everything apart in a process so gradual that it feels almost still. And you are allowed to move at your own pace within it. You are not required to match the scale of the universe. You are not required to understand all of it at once. You are simply part of it, experiencing a small piece of it, from a small place that holds its own quiet significance. Now, let your thoughts slow even further. There is no need to imagine distances anymore. No need to picture the edge of the observable universe or the structure of the cosmic web. Those ideas have already done their work. They have shown you how vast everything is. Now they can fade, like distant stars disappearing into the brightness of dawn. What remains is something simpler, the feeling of being here, breathing, existing, aware, and somewhere above you, whether you can see it or not, the universe continues exactly as it always has. Stars are forming, galaxies are drifting, light is traveling across distances so large that it will take millions or billions of years to arrive anywhere. But none of that needs your attention right now, because this moment is enough. There is a quiet balance here, between the vastness you have seen and the stillness you now feel, between something unimaginably large and something gently present. And that balance is where the scale of the universe becomes something peaceful rather than overwhelming. It is no longer about how small Earth is. It is about how something small can exist comfortably within something so large, without needing to compete with it, without needing to change it. Just existing is enough. So let yourself rest in that idea. No comparisons, no measurements, just a quiet awareness, floating gently within a universe that continues on its own, endlessly, calmly, without asking anything from you. And as this calm deepens, the journey itself begins to dissolve. No longer a path from small to large, but a soft, continuous presence, where everything from the smallest world to the largest structure simply exists together. And you are part of that quiet whole. And now, as everything continues to soften, there is one final layer to gently notice. Not something distant, not something vast, but something very close. Because after traveling across the scale of the universe, after seeing how everything expands beyond comprehension, something simple begins to stand out. The quiet contrast between what is large and what is experienced. The universe, as you now understand, is not just big. It is endlessly unfolding. Structures form, drift, dissolve. Galaxies move through space. Stars are born and fade. Light travels across distances that stretch beyond imagination. And yet, none of it feels hurried. There is no sense of urgency in the stars. No pressure in the movement of galaxies. No rush in the expansion of space. Everything happens at its own natural pace, slow and steady, guided by quiet laws that do not change. And in that sense, the universe is deeply calm. Now bring that feeling closer, because on Earth, things often feel different. Time feels faster, moments feel shorter, thoughts move quickly. Life can feel full, sometimes even overwhelming. But when you place that experience within the scale of the universe, something begins to shift. Because compared to the movement of galaxies, your life is not rushed. Compared to the lifespan of stars, your moments are not short. They are simply different in scale. And that difference is not something to resist. It is something to gently accept. Because just as the universe unfolds at its own pace, so does everything within it, including you. Now imagine time in a different way, not as something that is running out, but as something that is flowing, like a slow river, moving steadily, without urgency, without pressure. The same way planets orbit stars, the same way galaxies drift through space. You are part of that same flow, not separate from it, not racing against it, simply within it. And this changes something very subtle, but very important. Because when you stop comparing your pace to something else, when you stop measuring your moments against an imagined standard, everything becomes quieter, more spacious, more calm, just like the universe itself. Now let that idea settle gently. There is no need to move faster, no need to reach further, no need to match the scale of anything you have seen, because you already exist within the same reality that holds all of it. The same universe that stretches across billions of light years is the same universe that allows this moment to exist. And that means something very simple. You belong here, not because of size, not because of importance in a physical sense, but because you are part of the same unfolding process, the same quiet story. Now let your awareness rest again. Feel the stillness around you, the gentle sense of space, not as something empty, but as something open, something that does not press in, but allows everything to exist freely within it. And within that openness, there is no need to hold on to scale anymore. The numbers, the distances, the comparisons, they can all fade now, because they have already done their work. They have shown you how vast everything is, and now you are free to simply exist within that vastness, without needing to define it, like floating in a calm ocean at night. No waves, no urgency, just a quiet sense of being carried gently, without effort. The universe does not demand anything from you. It does not expect you to understand it completely. It simply continues and allows you to be part of it. And that is enough. So as we move toward the final moments of this journey, everything begins to slow even more. The thoughts become softer. The sense of distance fades. The awareness remains, but without effort. Just a quiet presence within something vast and calm and endless. And now we begin to drift into the final quiet. Not an ending, but a soft settling. Because everything that needed to expand already has. Every distance has been stretched. Every layer of the scale of the universe has unfolded gently, step by step, until there is nothing left to compare, nothing left to measure, nothing left to reach toward. Only this moment remains, still, calm, present. And within this stillness, something very simple becomes clear. The universe does not need to be understood to be beautiful. It does not need to be measured to be meaningful. It does not need to be explored endlessly to be complete, because it already is, and so are you. Now imagine the vastness again, but this time, not as something overwhelming, not as something stretching infinitely in all directions, but as something quiet, like a deep night sky with only a few visible stars. Not empty, just peaceful. The galaxies are still there. The cosmic web still stretches across unimaginable distances. The observable universe still expands slowly, gently, without pause. But none of it feels heavy anymore. Feels distant in a soft way, like something you are aware of, but not burdened by. And that is where the journey has been leading all along. Not toward understanding everything, but toward feeling comfortable within not needing to. Because the scale of the universe, when followed completely, does something unexpected. It releases you. It removes the need to hold onto size, importance, comparison. It shows you that everything, no matter how large or small, simply exists within the same quiet unfolding. There is no competition in scale. A galaxy does not compete with a star. A star does not compete with a planet. And Earth does not need to compete with the universe. It simply exists within it. And so do you. Now let that idea rest gently. No need to expand your thoughts outward again. No need to return to distances or structures. Let everything remain soft and distant, like a memory that no longer needs to be held clearly. Because what matters now is not the journey outward, but the feeling that remains after it. A quiet sense of place. A gentle awareness of being part of something vast, without needing to define your role within it. Just being here is enough. Now imagine the Earth once more, but not as something small or fragile, just as a place. A quiet world turning slowly in space, oceans moving gently, clouds drifting across its surface, night and day passing in a steady rhythm. Nothing urgent, nothing rushed, just continuous motion, calm and steady. And somewhere on that surface, you are there, not separate from the universe, not lost within it, simply part of it, breathing, thinking, resting. And as you remain here, something else becomes clear. The universe has always been this way. Vast, quiet, unfolding slowly across time. And yet, for most of human experience, it felt different. Felt small, contained, centered around us. But now you have seen beyond that. And instead of making everything feel insignificant, it has made everything feel more open, more spacious, more calm. Because when nothing needs to be the center, everything is allowed to simply exist. And that includes you. So let your awareness settle even deeper now. No need to hold on to thoughts. No need to follow ideas. Just a soft presence, like drifting at the edge of sleep, where everything becomes lighter, quieter, more distant. The stars fade gently into the background. The galaxies dissolve into soft light. The concept of scale disappears completely, and all that remains is stillness, a quiet universe, and a quiet awareness within it, resting together. And now, we arrive at the quietest point of all. Not the edge of the universe, not the limit of observation, but the place where everything gently comes to rest. There is nothing more to expand, nothing more to compare, nothing more to understand. Only this soft awareness, slowly drifting without direction, without effort. The journey has carried you across unimaginable distances, from the surface of a small world to the vast web of galaxies, to the silent boundary of what can ever be seen. And yet, here at the end, something very simple remains. You are still here, breathing, aware, present, and the universe continues quietly around you. Stars are still burning in distant galaxies. Light is still traveling across billions of years. Space is still expanding, slowly, gently, without pause. But none of it asks anything from you now. None of it needs to be followed or understood. It simply exists, and you are allowed to simply exist with it. Now let that feeling deepen. Imagine the vastness one last time, but softened, like a distant memory. The galaxies are no longer sharp or defined. The cosmic web is no longer a structure to observe. Everything has faded into a gentle background, like faint light behind closed eyes. And in that softness, there is no scale anymore. No large, no small, just presence. Because in the end, the scale of the universe dissolves into something that cannot be measured. Not in light years, not in galaxies, not in numbers, but in stillness. A stillness that exists everywhere, from the largest structures to the smallest moments. Now bring your awareness gently back to yourself. Not as a place in space, but as a feeling. The quiet rhythm of your breath. The subtle sense of being here. Nothing more is needed. No journey. No distance. No comparison. Just this. And within this, something quietly beautiful becomes clear. The universe does not feel vast anymore. Feels peaceful. Because when you stop reaching across it, when you stop measuring yourself against it, it no longer feels like something separate or overwhelming. It feels like something you are already inside. Something you have always been inside. And that changes everything in the softest possible way. Because you are not standing against the scale of the universe. You are resting within it, like a small, quiet point, floating in something endless, but not lost, not overwhelmed, simply held. And there is comfort in that, a quiet kind of comfort that does not need to be explained. Now, let everything slow even further. Thoughts fade, images soften. The sense of distance disappears completely, and all that remains is a gentle awareness, drifting, resting, quietly present, within a universe that no longer needs to be understood, just felt, just experienced, just allowed to be. And as this final moment settles, as the last trace of the journey fades into stillness, You can let go of everything you've been holding, the scale, the vastness, the questions, the need to understand. Let it all drift away, like distant stars fading into the night, because you've already seen enough. You've already gone far enough. And now you can rest in a quiet universe, on a quiet world, as a quiet awareness, gently held within something infinite. No beginning, no end, just this calm, endless presence, top of form,